Welcome to NovoEdTalks, where we reveal real-world strategies and expert insights from learning and development professionals. In every episode, we chat with practitioners, course designers, learning strategists, and business leads. We hear about their experiences in the learning industry and predictions for the profession and the trends that they're seeing. But before we get started, a little bit about NovoEd. Founded at Stanford's Social Algorithms Lab in 2012, NovoEd is a people-centric, capability-building platform that combines social and collaborative learning to drive performance readiness at scale. Through cohort-based experiences centered around human interaction, NovoEd taps into collective wisdom, placing each learner at the center of perspective, application, and expertise. Large enterprises such as 3M, GE, Marriott International, and Nestle partner with NovoEd to accelerate their critical initiatives, reconnect teams, and achieve rapid alignment through learning that is felt, experienced, and swiftly transformed into impact. Now, let's meet our guest for today's episode. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the NovoEdTalks podcast, a place for training trailblazers to get real. Always have a problem with that one. I'm Lynn Christensen-Esker of NovoEd, and today I'm joined by Lisa Ellis, Head of Product at Sandler Systems, LLC, a data-driven sales performance company. Lisa has led the development of more than 1,000 hours of sales performance and leadership training, impacting more than 150,000 learners. She's passionate about designing, deploying, and managing transformative learning experiences for revenue teams. Lisa, welcome to NovoEdTalks.
Hi, Lynn. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here today to talk with you about all things learning and development. Very excited to be here.
Excited that you are here. Let's start off with a little bit about your background and your role at Sandler Systems. Can you tell us about that and maybe a little bit about your data-driven sales performance model?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been working with Sandler for the past 3 years, but I have been in the sales performance and sales training space for over a decade, and really looking at how we go from that in-person, really high energy training event to actually driving lasting behavior change, implementing new techniques and systems and processes for sales teams. So I came to Sandler a couple of years ago to help with their transformation. Now, this was in the midst of the COVID pandemic, the massive shift to virtual selling. And prior to that, Sandler was known for really great public speaking sessions, high value training, really great sales methodology, but it wasn't really known for the online experience or how we flow into or how we fit into the flow of work. So over the past couple of years, we've been working to build out the infrastructure to really be a data-driven sales performance company. And what that means is rather than training people, on a standard methodology, just because, this is the system, we know it works, you get all components of it, we actually want to go in and laser focus on the exact sales skills and competencies that your teams need based off of where they are today and how they're performing. So from the data-driven standpoint, we actually come in and analyze sales performance, the talent that you have, and the sales processes at the start of our engagements. So we use assessments, surveys, and interviews to do that. And we work with IO psychologists and have solution architects who know the Sandler content library to then come up with a personalized training experience for those sales teams as well as the individuals. Because one of the things that we know is you can create a great training experience for a large group of people, especially if you're, fitting in that cohort-based training box. But there are going to be people who maybe need to shore up their skills in other areas to really get performing at all levels. So that's one of the things that we've really brought to Sandler and are starting to deploy with our customers, which is it's exciting to see.
So you mentioned, the rise of remote work. How has your approach to learning and development changed
Oh
as a
yeah.
result of that?
Well, so we used to do a lot of our video learning. We did a lot of video-based learning because we would have conferences. People would come into our offices. So we had a videographer and we would shoot a lot of stuff. But from our side, getting people together happened as often, but we still want to be producing highly engaging video content, dynamic online content. So we're actually starting to use some generative AI avatars for a lot of that, as well as doing a lot more engaging and interactive e-learning to explore our concepts, bringing in discovery learning, gamification elements, and challenges for selling scenarios. So that's one way that we've started to adapt just from a content development standpoint. But then we're also updating the Sandler methodology to respond to the fact that selling is hybrid. Sometimes you're virtual, or maybe in your role, you're specifically all virtual and remote, and you need different skills than somebody who's going to be going out and flying and meeting in person with your customers. So we've actually built out a lot more content around how to virtually sell, because it's harder on both the selling side, because a really big important part of being a great sales professional is the ability to build relationships, because when you are a trusted advisor, those conversations happen more easily. You get more clarity from your buying teams. And it's also harder on the buyer side because they've got to do a lot more coordination to figure out what they're going to buy. And it's harder with virtual teams. There's more meetings, more processes, and it's more challenging to navigate that. So those are all things that we've actually been doing to adapt not only our content, but the learning experiences for it as well.
So to clarify for our audience, since you're
Yeah.
kind of going into that, Sandler Systems trains other organizations,
Yes.
sales teams, revenue teams,
Yeah.
right? So who are your customers and who are their learners?
Yeah, so our customers are anywhere from small to medium businesses all the way up to large enterprises, anybody who has a sales team. We can train the frontline salespeople who are out there doing cold calling, so business development representatives, inside sales teams, sales executives who are responsible for lead generation all the way through closing, strategic account management, account managers, customer success, and customer service professionals. So when you think about kind of the whole revenue engine, those are the learners that we serve. And so we are often partnering with our clients' learning and development and sales enablement teams to implement these programs. So we're behind the scenes, kind of becoming the secret weapon for a lot of L&D and sales enablement professionals, because then you can rely on our content. Our learning experiences are good. We have an amazing bench of facilitators as well as a train the trainer program. So if you have the talent and the people to facilitate, we also offer that way to get embedded into your organization as well. So that's our market base. And we serve a lot of different verticals. So it might be construction materials, software, pharma. Our methodologies are rooted in psychology and are really focused on human to human interactions. So what you're selling doesn't necessarily matter. It's how you're selling it. So that's kind of the Sandler stuff in a nutshell. Yeah.
No, that's fascinating, and I think we at Nova would totally agree with that approach. So what kind of challenges are you trying to address for your customers? And
Yeah.
what are their learners challenged with?
I think this is something for sales, but I think it's a lot of us. Sellers and anybody who's supporting the revenue chain, we're just overwhelmed by all the technology that is being thrown at them to do their jobs. They're in CRM, they're using call intelligence, they're using business intelligence platforms, lead generation platforms, social networking. There's so much we are asking salespeople to do. And for a long time, because of the way that sales budgets operated, it was, hey, let me go buy this new tool and maybe we'll close one big deal off of it and then it's all worth it. And it's just overwhelming. The amount of training that salespeople have to do just to understand their tech stack, let alone be effective at selling, is massive. And so one of the ways that we're trying to address that is through our partnerships. We've identified some of the leaders in the technology spaces, be it CRM, call intelligence, sales enablement platforms, marketing automation stuff. And so pulling all of that together and weaving that into the methodology training of how you sell, so that we're talking about when you're in your CRM getting notifications of, hey, you're about to have a call with a client, here are some things you're going to want to ask based off of where you are in your sales process, and really starting to get that in front of learners just in time. Those are some of the things that we're trying to solve for, because we know it's really challenging. That tech stack is huge and salespeople are feeling overwhelmed.
It's such a big challenge. And it seems to be almost a little bit nebulous, right? Like sales is art more than science in a lot of ways, although there is a lot of
I was
science.
going to say, in some cases, the amount of data we can get, especially with the trend with account-based marketing. And so this is where marketing and sales start to run into each other, right? Because you want the marketing engine working to generate leads so that your sales team has real leads to go chase. Because we can actually start to see imprints and impressions of what people are searching for, the problems that they might be looking to solve, salespeople are getting better educated before they even outreach to those clients. But on the other side, buyers are more educated, and they're actually preferring to bring salespeople in later in the process, because they can do so much more research and gather the information on their own before they need to actually talk to a real person. So there's opportunities and challenges on both sides with the explosion of technology and available data out there.
So before we get into the technology, which I'm always fascinated with, can you talk a little bit more about that? Like how do you measure the
Mhm.
success of your customers'
Yeah.
programs, the programs that you put on for your customers?
Absolutely. So a key strategy that we deploy is benchmarking the start of an engagement, because we have to take that before picture before we start implementing anything. It serves two purposes. One, we can show the change when we measure again. The other side of it is it actually gives us the information we need to create that personalized training intervention. And so at the start of an engagement, we deploy surveys to every individual, or not surveys, sorry, assessments to every individual who's going to be going through the program. They get identified by their leadership. And we usually organize them by role or geography or team. But we go through those assessments, and we have this really awesome data set of over 1.3 million salespeople. And that data set is all about their sales competencies and their talents. So we look at measuring what are the knowledge and skills that they have to do the job, as well as the innate traits that they bring with them, whether or not they might be a good fit for that role. So those are the things that we're measuring about individuals, as well as sales performance data. And so when you think about sales performance data, that's information that might live in CRM, it might live in an ERP system, depending on what you can get. The things that we typically measure are quota attainment, because most salespeople are quota or commission based. If the clients have the data, we love to get win rates. We love to see sales cycle length, average deal size. And if they're really good at tracking data, we love to see all of that information broken out by sales stage. That's not always available. But we work with our clients to help identify the KPIs that matter to them. For example, if we're working with a customer success team, they may not be quota or commission based, but they may have renewal targets or customer churn metrics that we're looking at. So we have a whole list of KPIs, and we work with clients to identify them so that we are getting the talent and competency data with the performance data so that we can look at that holistically for individuals and teams. So we do that as a before picture. We then align our content based off of where those competency scores are and what we're seeing in the performance data. And then we run our training. Then we reassess. Usually it's between 9 to 12 months later. So after we deploy a robust training program, we will check in. We do a quarterly check-ins just to see incremental process, but then we do the reassessment on the sales competencies after about a year. And we see that performance improvement. Now, we don't always see the scores come up on every single competency. It'll depend on where we focused our training, because some, depending on the role and the goals for the organization, maybe managing procurement isn't something that they need to focus on because they're not talking to procurement teams all that often. But delivering their value proposition and making sure they have a tight story to tell that, so that buyers get engaged and they stay engaged. They don't ghost them late in the sales cycle because they're not seeing the what's in it for me. That's what we helped fix. And that comes out in not only the competency remeasurement, but also the sales performance data.
That's great. That's great. And I think you've kind of answered my question about technology. Is there anything else that how you might use technology to, to improve or to carry out your programs?
Yeah, one of the things that I'm excited about, we haven't released it yet, but we're starting to work on it, is AI role play. And so this is real-time AI role play, but instead of chatting, so typing, it would be talking to an avatar. There are a couple of platforms out there that are doing it today, but there's another subscription you have to buy, another, API you have to set up. We're actually partnering with an e-learning development firm who has a game plan. We haven't fully launched it yet, but the idea would be that this actually gets written as a scoring package and deploys inside our learning management system along with all of our other content. And because it's SCORM, it works with our headless content engine and writes all the data on scoring and everything back to our learning management system. So we're working on testing that right now. We've got a functional prototype as you do when you're testing stuff. But that's one of the most exciting things that I'm seeing, because that's where we can actually really see some of these sales techniques that we teach coming to life in practice, but in a safe place that's not live fire in front of clients. One of the other big ways we approach that with customers is we actually talk not just about the training interventions we lead, but setting up that almost like a professional learning community. So I know a lot of learning and development leaders know this concept, they embrace it themselves, but for getting that embedded in sales teams. So maybe it's role play Wednesdays or role play Fridays. We see that, like, those are usually the 2 days that our clients pick. But those are days where they, hey, I've got this upcoming call with a client. Will somebody role play it with me? So that they're practicing, rehearsing their talk tracks, anticipating objections before they get in front of their clients. And that's incredibly valuable. But we want to give them a way to do that. Maybe they don't have their team, or their meeting isn't coming up before they've got to get in front of their client. So what if we have a way for them to role play with AI ahead of time? So those are some of the things that we're looking at. There's some really exciting stuff out there with technology coming.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you've mentioned role play, you've mentioned avatars, you've mentioned gamification. Do you have like a success story or something that you like to pull out to give an example? I'd love to hear.
Yeah, one of the big successes we've had recently, and we're about to do another turn on this with the AI role play release, is we offer 2 levels of certification for Sandler. Right now, we're going to be going up to a 3rd next year, but our first level is, aligns with Kirkpatrick level 2. So that's, do you know it? Did you retain it? That's an assessment that we deploy. Do you remember all the things that we taught you? Can you apply it situationally in theory?
Mhm.
The next level up from that is, can you actually apply it in practice? And we have 2 ways of assessing this right now. One is through role play. We have a rubric, we have a guide. You can score people on it, and that's been really powerful. We've actually figured out a great way to deploy that at scale for virtual delivery. And scoring all of that to authentically validate that somebody can have that sales conversation and role play. But now we're taking that rubric and starting to apply it to the AI avatars, and that's going to be our next release. So we've run this a couple of times, so we've calibrated the rubric. We know what the scoring calibration looks like. We know how to teach people how to score it. So now we're teaching the AI model how to do that. And it's going to be really cool to see that come to life in the next 6 months.
Seems like you're really on top of like recent trends. I think you probably have to be,
I
right? In
have to
your
be.
position.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do
Yeah.
you see L&D going? Like is there a trajectory that we're looking at here?
I think some of the stuff that's coming is really interesting. So I think that there's just going to be an explosive growth of generative AI, chatbots, and all that stuff for meaningful interventions. But they're only as good as their algorithms, right? And the training data that you have underneath them. The other thing you have to be cautious about is where you're putting your information and working with these large language models. There's still a lot of unknowns from an ethical consideration, from a privacy and copyright protection, perspective. So those are all the hurdles that I'm, on the forefront navigating right now. But I think that we're going to continue to see that. And the shift that has been moving from formal training to more of that informal training, learning in the flow of work is just going to keep accelerating. I think we're going to see that. And in the L&D space, keeping ahead of that, I think is going to be really powerful, because when people get pulled out of work to go into training, we've got to make it sure that it's really valuable, highly motivating, and delivered in context. Because that's what they're going to be used to seeing, is all these little assistants teaching them how to use software, teaching them how to, write a better email, just hovering over their shoulder. And so that formal training environment, we've got to think about what's the right content to put in front of them there, and what are the right experiences they need coming out of that. Because we're probably going to shift from the basics to really thinking about what's the information synthesis that needs to happen in that peer-to-peer learning environment.
We're running out of time here because you've
Yeah.
had so much great stuff to say. But final question, what advice would you give to engage a team that's virtual, global, hybrid, all that good stuff? How do you build that dynamic teamwork?
Um, it takes a lot of effort. And when you're stepping into that leadership role, I think that there's two things that I would laser focus in on, is be receptive to feedback from your team. Really make sure that you become an open space for listening. I think that that's really critical. And then also setting clear expectations and following through on them. Um, before we were in this remote world, we could have meetings, we could have touch base, we built that kind of common momentum. So when you think about communications and communicating the message and communicating it often, you probably need to tell your team something 5 or 6 times for it to really sink in, especially virtually. And so if you think you've already told them enough times, you probably need to tell them 2 more times, and then, and then you'll be in good shape. And then also really understanding your individual team members, what motivates them. One of the things that I've got to learn really well at Sandler is the DISC framework for communication. And being able to adapt my DISC style as a high I to my team members who are often S's and C's is really important, so that I'm focusing on the details that they need, not just the emotions that are there. I think that being able to adapt your communication style to those individuals is also really critical when you're doing remote stuff. And also make sure to fit in the fun. It's hard, and you don't want to make it feel like a chore. So maybe it's doing a virtual wine tasting, where you should send your team a box, or finding the budget to get everybody together in person a couple times a year. It's really valuable.
So important. Yeah, so important. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for your time today. Your perspectives have been great, and I've loved everything you've had to say. I hope you get some calls after this, because Sandler sounds like they really are doing the right thing for their customers. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this episode, and see you next time on the NovoEd Talks podcast.